Hi guys. Hi everyone on Facebook. I'm Bruno. I'm a writer from Richmond, Virginia, and this is the pilot episode for my first talk show / blog, The Writer's Room. This is exactly what the title says. I'm in my own domain, and these videos are going to be based around my writing, the current events of the publishing industry, and talk about the books and writers that I respect today and of the past. Another goal of mine is to show that my generation can produce valuable works of fiction and can lead a new wave of creative talent into the forefront of the culture. Behind me is my room. I don't know if you can see it, but my bookshelf from IKEA is behind me to my left. The books that I've read or that are signed by authors are on the last 3 rows, while the top 3 are books that I've either started and abandoned or just books that I've bought and are not going to read. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am from a small suburban area called Lakeside. It's pretty interesting because if you're on one area of Lakeside near Dumbarton Library, you have to cross over a hill that looks over railroad tracks and takes you around Lakeside but not into Lakeside. For example, you can't cut into Lakeside from the middle of Dumbarton with a car. Like I said, you have to go over the hill and take a right into the residential area. I've lived here my entire life, but my parents are from a little town called Aliquippa in Pennsylvania. In a way, Aliquippa is very much the same but different in geography. Maybe that's a personal idea, but nonetheless. Of course, there are no hills that occupy the residential area, but it is still an area that reminds me how the neighborhood is built like a little fortress. And if you hear me say that I have Pittsburgh steel in my veins, that's a very personal statement, meaning that I feel that my parents have passed on the steel of Pittsburgh into my veins. I feel that everyone from Pittsburgh should understand that I was born in Richmond, but the fact that my parents are not from Richmond, I am ultimately a third personality, or a southern boy with Pittsburgh steel in my veins. Meaning, actually, I don't really know what that means right now, but it's just how I feel. And when I was always with my grandfather, I always heard that Aliquippa accent, but I never realized how strong it was in my father and mother until now. Of course, they've lived here in Richmond, Virginia since the 70s, so I don't know if they've lost that accent, but they've always been to put it this way, they're always going to be northerners to people who are from the South. That's just how it is down here. My goal is not to be on the show, it's not to be biased, because even I think facts or quotes help bring a solid base to an argument. So I am going to back my personal comments with some facts, and honestly I try to keep everything balanced. So here comes a 2-part question of this episode. What and why do you want to write? This must be the $1 million question that everyone has asked me. But I think why is more important than what, because what a writer talks about is very different from what he or she writes about. The answer to what do I want to write about is complex. What I don't classify as interesting for me, is to write nonfiction books. I think a good nonfiction book has to have an accessible story and not rely on the source material to be the area of interest. I mean, there's an audience for nonfiction readers, but that's not my area of expertise. Now, why I want to write is another beast in itself. If people say to me that the novel is dead, I would have to disagree entirely. Thanks to the Nook and Kindle, which I do own, people seem to be reading again. More so than ever. Recently, the New York Times just added the top selling lists of ebooks that are selling. And funny enough, the writer of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Girl Who Kicks the Hornet's Nest, and Girl Who Played with Fire, didn't list them in particular order, but that series is like the top selling ebook. So, gotta thank technology for some good things, but I digress. I think Don DeLillo, the author of many books such as Underworld, Libra, and Falling Man, said this when asked about the state of the novel. If I were a writer, how would I enjoy being told the novel is dead? How liberating to work in the margins, outside of central perception. Now, to me, I've been writing books since I was 16 and have stayed with my own ideas since. And before, I would just be writing haphazardly and with no real idea behind the story. Even if I could call them that, maybe just writing exercises. Until I found one story that made sense to me, which I will discuss in the future. Until then, I've been trying to follow my own ideas and subjects that are interesting to me and work them into a fictional setting. A big key to my work is realism. Even though they may be stories, some of them genre stories, I always look for that one glimpse of realism that makes a story so believable and intriguing that it becomes integral to the story itself. I will get into the craft, themes, and techniques that I use in my fiction later on as the series progresses. The kind of stories and storytellers I respect are varied and differ from each other. My path into literature and all the genres that could only be described as my own personal globe, where the prose creates unforgettable landscapes of thoughts and has filled my head with images that are unforgettable, beautiful, and haunting at the same time. The writers that have inspired me and have a place on my own personal globe, while many of them should be their own planets or constellations in their own right, are people who I admire. And to many who know me, these aren't new writers who I emulate. But here I'm just going to name a few. John Irving, Stephen King, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Salman Rushdie, J.R.R. Tolkien, Umberto Eco, Michael Ondaatje, Jonathan Franzen, Jane Austen, Bret Easton Ellis, Philip K. Dick, Homer, Dante Alighieri, Mario Puzo, and there are many more, but these are just a few examples of both prose authors and poets who I have read and admire and still continue to admire. Of course, there will always be more authors that will expand my universe